What's up, y'all? Will here at Schedulefly. So this was quite an interesting conversation. This is with Scott Conary of Carrboro Coffee Roasters. Carrboro is here in North Carolina, and it's basically next door to Chapel Hill. So if you're familiar with the University of North Carolina, Carrboro is right next door. And he owns Carrboro Coffee Roasters and a few cafes. And I love coffee, but I don't know a ton about coffee. And I felt like this was like if you imagine the game of chess, like I felt like this was an amateur chess player interviewing a grandmaster. So I didn't feel like I could ask enough intelligent, deep dive follow-up questions because this guy is, one of the foremost coffee experts you'll ever find anywhere. And I'll let you listen to hear all the experience he has, not just in brewing coffee, but in roasting coffee, that is. But let's just say that he's a sought-out expert in this field and has quite a resume. So I thoroughly enjoyed speaking to Scott. I learned a ton from him. I've had his coffee, and it's phenomenal. I can't wait to hopefully meet him in person next time I'm in that area, which I'm lucky to be in that area every now and again. But whether you like coffee or not, you'll love this episode. This is just a great education in this global product, and from just a super nice dude and super kind and humble guy. So before we get to let you enjoy it, though, first, a word from our sponsor, Pot Menu, who's also a partner of Schedulefly. And Pot Menu is about making your day easier and your sales bigger. They will simplify your marketing operations, bring in more guests, and capture customer data for personalized remarketing to keep them coming back. With one super simple to use platform that integrates with most point of sale companies, Pot Menu starts with a beautifully designed, easy to update, interactive menu that transforms the guest experience online. It includes a brand new website that's optimized for search engines like Google for no additional cost, automated digital marketing, online ordering and waitlisting, and you'll never miss another call with their new AI answering solution. This thing's answered over 1 million phone calls for as little as 47 cents an hour, and there's so much more in there. So, look, I'll say this. We have a lot of mutual customers. And those mutual customers of both Schedulefly and Pot Menu that I've spoken to are very happy with Pot Menu. They have glowing things to say about it, not just the product, but just as importantly or more importantly, the service that backs it up. So check out the link in the show notes and give Pot Menu a look. You will not regret it. It's a great product, great company. And here we go with Scott Conary, Carrboro Coffee Roasters. We did this one via Zoom, and I look forward to doing another one with him in person one day. Thank you all for listening. More of these coming soon. See ya. Hey, what's up, man?
How are you?
I'm good. Scott, how you doing?
Doing all right, man. It's another day.
Another day. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this today. I appreciate it.
No, I'm excited to talk to you, and I appreciate you reaching out.
You bet, man. Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, just take a second to introduce yourself.
Which hat am I wearing as I introduce myself? It's always a complicated question. All right. My name is Scott Conary. That part's easy. I own Carrboro Coffee Roasters, a wholesale coffee roaster in North Carolina. We have 3 different flagship cafes, all with different names and different personalities. I also work in almost every facet of the coffee industry. So I do a lot of work with world competitions for coffee, both judging and judge training and just general organization, and representing around the world. And then I do a lot of consulting work. So that could be consulting work for cafe or roastery build-outs, competition, conception, skill building, but I also work for the Alliance for Coffee Excellence, which runs the Cup of Excellence program around the world for the last over 2 decades now, which basically works to highlight the best coffees coming out of coffee growing countries every harvest, and then puts them on an auction platform for the world to experience.
Got your hands full, my friend.
That's a short version.
Well, I will say that, as I told you in an email, man, I had a cup of your coffee at Bluebird in Chapel Hill a week ago, and it was fantastic, to the point I was like, okay, I got to know, like, who do you get your coffee from?
That's such a great testimonial. I love it.
You bet. Absolutely. They were obviously very high on y'all. And then, so it was because I think I had already gotten in touch with you. I mean, you guys are a customer through Perennial there.
Yep.
Tell me about Perennial.
Perennial is our newest cafe. It was created with actually with competitions in mind, actually, because there's a lot of what we love about competitions that are a mirror to what people do in a retail setting. Like there's skills that, we want to basically showcase. That what does it really take to be a great barista? What does it really take to be able to do this? Not just do it, but do it well. And those are ones that we want competitors to have or strive to have. But then there's this sort of, it's a competition, so we want to, let's jack it up. Let's put that level up there and see, and basically say what's possible in our industry. What kind of things aren't we doing because we're sort of doing this stuff every day and we don't have time for it? Yeah. Let's push innovation. Let's push, the creativity. What are we not doing? And so, you start to bring in food science, and you start to bring in all these crazy fun things that can be done, maybe not done in a high throughput scenario of a really bustling cafe. And our goal with Perennial was to find that balance point. What can we do to push and do an elevated coffee experience, but that can be done in a routine way, at least up to a certain volume. And so we're doing a lot of, you hear a lot of mocktail conversations now because people are looking for the non-alcoholic versions of a bar or anything really. And that's our angle. Our angle is very mocktail-like. It's very focused on the process and the creativity of it, and actually the physicality, like people love to watch their bartender make their drink. That's the same kind of thing. And a little bit of that gets lost in a high throughput scenario of a cafe, especially a high volume cafe, where it's happening so fast. It's not as easy to be in the middle of that process. And sometimes you don't even know if what they're doing is your drink, right?
Yeah, for sure. Volume, they're just pressing a button and okay.
Yeah. And so this was intentional. This is let's showcase the skill set. Let's really be intentional with the recipe, but also the products that are going into it, and we're growing herbs in the back garden, and we're making sure we're using those and creating the elements of the signature of the beverages, and trying to sort of push that envelope. And honestly, it's a test because we don't know what the customer is interested in. We know what we like and we know what we would love to do. And so we're trying to find that balancing point.
How long have you had Perennial?
It's only been about 1.5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dude, this is, God, I've got 1,000 questions I want to ask you. Well, first of all, how did you, how long have you been in the coffee business? Like how'd you get started?
Well, so I'm going on about 25 years now. I got started in a very simple way, which was I loved coffee. Probably the unusual part of that is I loved coffee at a young age. And I think that, especially in the US, that's an unusual thing, even if it's from the perspective of I probably wasn't drinking the best coffee. So what I was attracted to as a 10 or 11-year-old was actually the bitterness.
Which is like 10 or 11, huh?
Which is also really weird for kids because they usually gravitate towards sweetness.
Yeah.
And it just became, it was a hobby, a passionate hobby that I wanted to sort of figure out, how do I make this a passionate business? How do I make this something that is intentional, not just, I just want to make coffee. I want to figure out how to do this correctly. And there were a lot of things that, as a hobbyist or as someone who was just paying attention, I thought, well, this is weird. Why does it work this way? Or why aren't these things happening in the industry? And I'm never really satisfied with the black box. So I would just dive in and try to figure it out.
Were you drinking black coffee when you were a kid? If you
Yeah. I was one of those weirdos.
like I drink black coffee, but like, I mean, like I was drinking like Mountain Dew when I was 10.
And it wasn't good coffee, right? So it's something.
Right. You were probably drinking Folgers Instant or something.
Whatever was available.
Whatever was available. Well, you found your calling, my friend. That's phenomenal. So are you from Carrboro?
No. So sort of I guess a northerner in a sense. Most of my family is from Maine, and then a lot of my childhood has been New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania development area.
Okay. How long have you been in Carrboro? What brought you there?
So I always part joke the weather, but there's a real reality to that too. And then actually work. So the other thing I haven't spoken about is that I'm actually a biochemist and a researcher by training, by schooling. So I was working for a lot of different pharmaceutical companies and doing research and biotech. And biotech area here, the Research Triangle Park is what drew me down here for potential jobs. And so a lot of that was happening concurrently.
Yeah, a biochemist with an entrepreneurial streak. Okay, I got
That's
you.
pretty much good. You're good at summing these up. That's good.
When did you push all your chips in on the coffee business?
About 10 or so years in. There was a solid 10 years of overlap.
Okay.
Where
did you start Carrboro Coffee Roasters?
That was 2004.
Okay, so and you had 10 years of dual. You were working still and getting that going.
Yeah, the cafes. So I started with retail just because it seemed like the easier way to start. Okay. And those were in the late 90s. So that's mid to late 90s.
So, and then you've got these cafes, you're doing so much stuff. I'm fascinated with the competitions. Like these are happening. Yeah, absolutely. Like how often do you attend these things? Where are they? Are they all around the world?
They're all around the world. Yeah. So there's a world organization that I've been involved with almost since the beginning. And the aspects of organization and all the details that are required to both create and maintain these things. So it's things like, we need an organizational committee, but we also need a rules and regulations committee, and we need to understand how to train the judges, and all of these things have to happen. And then we need representatives to go around to all the different countries who want to have a national champion that they send to the world level competitions. So the world competition happens every year. It moves around. It shows up in different places on purpose. This year it'll be in Athens. I should say half of the competitions, there's 7 different competitions. Half of them will be in Athens. Half of them will be in Taiwan at the end of the year. Okay. And then what people do is whatever competition they're trying to compete in the world level for, they have to win their national level, right? So they're basically representing their country. And every country will sort of treat this a little differently of how they develop that competition format in order to create a national champion that they then send to the world championships. But there's 68 countries now who are competing at the world, to get a national champion to send to the world level. And for each of those countries, you need a representative on hand so that everything's running smoothly and it's sanctioned and everything's above board. So I do that job too. Luckily not alone, because there is no possible way. Yeah. And so the real answer is this could be endless, right? This could be constant, and it's all volunteer work. So there's that. Clearly we all believe in what we're doing. And we've been doing it since 2000. So we have a tested proof of principle. We know what we've got. We have hopes and dreams, but we've already fulfilled a lot of those. As far as we know that it's an amazing skill building, professional development tool. We know that it's great for raising awareness for the industry and the profession. We know that now, especially from 20 years ago, I can go places in the world that I never used to be able to go and know I can get good coffee. You know, there used to be countries or places or towns or cities where you're like, it's going to be tough. And that's almost not true at all anymore, thanks to the competition.
The competition has facilitated the awareness, but how about the you know, I mean, there's a lot that it takes to get source good quality coffee, and different countries produce different, you know, stuff every year based on the climate. And then you got to get the beans to wherever these places are. And like, I find that to be a fascinating part of this.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the average coffee drinker's like, probably doesn't know the difference. I know you would be able to taste it in a second, probably, but like, tell me about that part of this. I've always found, because like, you find these, like, you know, if you're into coffee, you start going down, you know, these rabbit holes online of like, oh, well, all the, you know, like, most coffee has mycotoxins and it has mold. But if you buy my coffee that's grown in this special shady area in the, you know, upper hills of Costa Rica, then, you know, I've got the only you know, like, you see all that stuff, and then you're just like, holy crap, like, I don't buy that. That's BS. But it does make you really interested in learning about, like, where are these beans coming from, and like, this year, what countries were producing quality beans based on the weather, and then what are the factors that, you know, the political, or, you know, like, I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff that they have to deal with to get good coffee beans distributed all over the world. And I mean, how do you, like, and then how do you source that stuff every year, man? Like, if you got a coffee shop and you want to serve great quality coffee, like, what in the world? How do you do that?
Yeah, so you brought up a lot of really great points. I think one of the ones I'll lead with is, you know, we're fortunate enough to be that fully vertical integrated sort of rank of companies. So what I do can trickle down, you know, through all of them, and it does start with, hey, let's remember that this is an agricultural product. This is something that there are probably more things than we could ever sort of think about all at the same time that are variables that are going to impact what is going to happen every harvest. And you named a few of them. The best thing that I can say about our resources now, especially online resources, we're really lucky that we have the ability to disseminate information unlike ever before. 20 years ago, when you're sort of getting into the industry and trying to learn things, there wasn't that much available, and so you just had to immerse yourself, like you're basically saying now, but now you're overwhelmingly immersing yourself. And fortunately, you're being careful about what information that you're listening to and what it actually means in the grand scheme of things. But part of my job as a green coffee buyer for the roastery is to try to learn all of these things, and I think one of the things I love about coffee that I also love about science is you never know it all. Right? It's impossible. You will never know everything. So what can you learn? What can you affect? How do you utilize that information to hopefully make things better, as well as, we've got our at least on the surface, very simple, hey, I want quality coffee. I have definitions for that. Let me figure out how I can get that. And then let me figure out, how did that happen in the first place? And that's how I look at it. Like I said, I don't like black boxes. One of my personality traits is, once I like something, I want to know everything about it. So I'm going to dig in, and digging in means going all the way back to the source, going back to where's coffee grown, what are the details of it. And again, like I said, I just had to volunteer before. I just had to show up. And now there's programs. Now there are ways, and there's both online and in person, where you can start to develop that skill set and that knowledge base. But one of the things that I noticed was missing in the industry, from a green coffee buyer's perspective and maybe a roaster's perspective, was that everyone's very focused on quality and price. And sure, we're going to be, and that's never going to go away to some degree, but price was how little can I get it for? It was like all the wrong angle. If you are really worried about sustainability, if you're really worried about, can I get that coffee again? And instead, I just spent my time talking to the producers, so, I'll travel half the year just going to work with producers and being on their farms and finding out what's really going on there, and having these conversations of, well, what does it actually cost you? What does the harvest cost? And knowing that it might change next year, but at least there's a foundational point there that you can build off of that will allow them to continue to do the things that you want them to do. And beyond that, right? That's just the basic of paying a fair price for the actual effort of what it takes, but then also paying for that effort above and beyond, so that they have the means to live well, and not have to worry about it. You could even say it as something as simple as, hey, I don't have to worry about clean water and having a place to live and education and things like that we sort of take for granted, so that I can focus on growing coffee. That's a real step up for them. And then we very intentionally started out with that idea of creating relationships and that's where our program is, the Farmer Direct Relationship Program. And that was so important to us that it was either going to work or it wasn't. Like, that's how it was going to work, that we were going to have conversations that would hopefully develop a trust between us. And it went beyond that. Now it's friendships. Because I've been doing it for 10, 12, 15 years with the same people, and the same families. But that takes time. And so you have to sort of allow that to happen naturally. Like any good relationship, it's not going to just suddenly, hey, we're good. It's going to take a little bit of time for them to say, hey, this guy's coming into my country. I have a lot of bad experiences, and maybe even my father had bad experiences and his father had bad experiences. It's going to take a while to get past that, so that they know when I say something that it's good, they can trust it, and it's not going to be a problem. And that I'm there. My goal is to be a support system for them. I'm here to help you make sure that you can focus on what you need to do, and that you've got someone to buy your coffee. That alone is a huge thing for them on a daily basis, and certainly an annual basis. They don't even know if their coffee is going to sell if they were on the regular market. I mean, just imagine that you had a job where someone said, okay, you're going to work for a year. I can't tell you how much you're going to get paid, and I honestly don't even know if I'm going to be able to pay you. Right. But we'll find out at the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean, well, what's interesting you say that, because I'm sitting here thinking, like, how do we even grow enough coffee to fill the need all over the world? Because so many freaking people drink coffee. I mean, I see like a 30 deep line at a Starbucks drive-through, and I'm like, and they're just because it's not just the coffee, it's the these sweet, all this stuff.
Yeah, luckily they're not selling that much coffee.
Yeah, the demand is like off the hook. It just seems like. So I always wonder that, like, how is there enough good coffee grown every year to
you just qualified it.
Worldwide demand, like, because you can only grow it in certain climates and certain whatever. So that's fascinating to me that you got the flip side of that, which is a farmer that's like, well, I don't even know if we'll make enough money to turn a profit this year, but we're going to plant these beans and go for it.
Yeah, and those two things are connected. So the idea that you want enough coffee to basically supply the demand of the world is connected to, is it worth that farmer's time to bother growing coffee? Right. And if you don't make it worth their time, they're going to stop. Why wouldn't I'm going to grow something else? They'll grow avocados. I can make more money with that, right? So that's really an important part of this. We're just one player, and we're clearly not the biggest player, but we're hoping that having done this for decades, clearly it's a business model that's functional. And at the very least, we can be a template and say, yes, this is feasible. You can do this. Can you do it on the scale of the corporate size? Well, that's a whole other question. We're not sort of getting into that one. That's an entirely different business model. But we know that it can work. We know that we can support the producers for the vagaries that they have to attend to every year, and still make enough money to stay in business. And that's a feedback loop, right? So that will go back to, they will continue to farm. Other people will see that it's possible. They'll start farming coffee. Quality, the demand for quality is going to fuel more quality. So like you said, there's a qualifier in there. You said, how do we grow enough good coffee? That's very different than just saying, how do we grow enough coffee?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, there's countries like that are known for volume, like Vietnam and Brazil. A lot of the Indonesia and India are now growing a ton of coffee and actually starting to think about quality. So not just can I grow enough, it's what kind of coffee am I growing? Who is the buyer of this coffee? And is it sustainable long term?
Are you starting to see, one of the things I'm curious about, like you start hearing about, I don't know, like take Mexico, where the cartels are now like, they're getting their fingers in the avocado, but they're getting into businesses that have been, it's just their tentacles are long and many and wide. And like, do you start to see that as well in certain countries in South America, where cartels have built up networks over the year and they're having to diversify their revenue stream? Are you seeing that, or is that just not hit coffee yet?
I would argue that it's always been there.
Okay.
I would argue that most of the time you don't know and it doesn't affect you, and that's just fine.
Yeah, I got you. Okay. I got you. Makes sense. Well, what are some of like what's changing in the world of coffee? I mean, obviously,
so many things.
Well, okay, let's talk about, obviously, what you're talking about is fascinating to me, pushing the envelope of what you can do with coffee, and, the same trends that are happening with mocktails and using herbs and all that kind of stuff. You're on I would imagine, sort of the leading edge of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the jury's out whether that's going to be a viable thing. We're in a very fortunate position where in this instance, we can play around with that edge, and we can sit tight with it and try to develop an audience for it. And so far, it's got positive reviews. That's going to be very much based on demographics. It's not going to be for everywhere, but at least not at first, but it could be, and people said the same thing about any of the things that we take for granted now, that they maybe they didn't seem like they were going to work at first, but now they do. A lot of what's driving the coffee industry now is research. There's global research centers that are trying to figure out, how do we approach all of the problems that we're facing. A lot of them are climate change problems, which I always say, if you want to know what's going on, ask a farmer first, because they're going to see all the impacts, and they do. And the idea that as the weather changes, as the microclimates change, they're gonna have to figure out how to continue to grow coffee. Coffee is fairly sensitive, like you said, it grows in a pretty narrow range, a narrow belt around the world, and even within that belt, there's no guarantees. Like it's very much specific to the details of what the climate and what the soil, rainfall, rain periodization, all that stuff. Like any plant, it takes its cues from the weather, and if those cues are confusing, the plant's going to have problems. And so some of the research is based around, okay, let's try to minimize effects. How do we create resistant strains that are less insect, they're more insect resistant, or more mold or fungi resistant. So those are trying to deal with the effects of the changes that are happening. Because as the temperatures warm, all the fungus and all the rhizoids, they love that stuff, and so they're going to grow more than they would have before. Same thing with insects; they suddenly show up in places where they never were, right? Because now it's habitable for them. Some of the other things that are happening are more on a molecular level and a genetic strain level. So you have research going on different varietals of coffee, some of them just inherently being more resistant to these things, and also trying to pair that with quality. So we've always had a few different cultivars that were able to do some of the things that we want them to do as far as being disease resistant, but didn't necessarily cup that well, right? Didn't necessarily taste great. And so people were like, okay, this isn't sustainable because nobody wants to buy this, even if it is surviving. So now they're trying to pair that with cup quality as well as the details that you want. And that really brings it back around to one of the other major pushes in our industry, which is processing. And processing is just a way, it's a big general term for describing what happens after we pick the coffee cherry from the tree.
Yeah.
What do we do with it before
Right.
it gets to the roaster, basically? And there are hundreds and hundreds of steps that are possible to be taken. And the knowledge of what each of those steps does is crucial in what you will finally end up tasting, what the final flavor profile of that coffee will be. And what we've been noticing, especially the last 10 years or so, is the power of process and how you can really alter the flavor profile of a coffee just by those steps of what different things that you do and in the processing. And so we even have we work with a farm in Nicaragua where we were able to take one batch of the coffee, one section of the farm, same coffee, put it into 3 piles, process it 3 different ways, and it tasted like 3 different coffees.
What's an example of that when you say process it differently? Like what's an example of what specifically would happen differently between those 3 piles?
So there are 3 main categories, and again, I have to be very general, but there's 3 main categories of processing. There's a natural process, or let's say natural. I don't need to get too complicated. And basically, what you do is you pick the coffee cherry and then you let that cherry dry around the seed. So, not to miss too many important points, but the seed is the coffee that you know.
Yeah.
Then there's the other extreme, which is you pick that coffee cherry and then you depulp it so you get the seed out, and then you ferment that seed because there's still a couple more layers around that seed, and you need that fermentation to sort of break those down. And then you actually use water to wash them. You sort of scrub them, wash them clean, and then dry it.
Okay.
Right in between that is what they call honey process, and that means that we're gonna depulp that cherry. Then we're not gonna wash it. We're just gonna dry it right away. So that mucilage, which is one of the extra layers that's on the outside, is very sticky and sweet. So naturally, they called it honey. Will change the way that coffee tastes because of it being there when it's drying. The absorption of it going into the seed. So each of those stages will actually lend itself to having a different flavor profile.
So this is all done there at the farm when the
this is farm level. Yep.
Okay.
All this stuff has to happen within 24 hours of, honestly, like 12 hours of picking.
What is it? Okay. Are you getting beans in all year from different parts of the world because it's different climates and
exactly right. Yeah. So there's one, sometimes 2 harvests depending on where you are in the world. But yeah, the harvest times are shifted based on where you are.
Okay, got it. Do you and so you started as a kid drinking black coffee. Do you still drink black coffee, or do you
I'm doing it right now?
Yeah. How many cups a day do you drink?
Really not that many. I mean, for someone who's in this business, on an average basis, it's 2, 3, maybe 4. But competitions, it could be hundreds of cups a day. Like my tolerance is ridiculous, but it's not something you just do. You have to build yourself up to it.
I was going to say, because the caffeine alone would just it could be.
Caffeine doesn't affect me anymore. Actually, it just puts me to sleep.
Isn't it wild? I know, like, I drink like 4 cups a day, and I feel like it doesn't, but I try to drink. I like the, well, maybe correct me if I'm a novice here, but if I understand it correctly, at least what seems to be the case for me is that the darker roast are roasted longer and there's more flavor, less caffeine, versus a lighter roast would typically be less flavor, more caffeine. Is that right? Or I get that
I wouldn't get too hung up on the flavor thing, because that really is an inherent thing in the coffee itself. Sure, the roasting will determine what flavors come out, but it's not really a more or less thing with the degree of roast. There's a sort of feedback loop there between the coffee itself and how you're roasting it.
Okay.
But and even the caffeine, it's kind of a very small difference, the between a lighter and a darker roast. So a lot of what you experience is really the effect of what you're absorbing. And so the darker you roast something, the more you have available to absorb. It doesn't mean you want it, but it's there to absorb. And so that might be part of what your own personal biochemistry, like how you're reacting to that experience. It doesn't mean that there's more or less, there's just more available.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'll drink like 3 or 4 a day, and I never feel wired or jittery, whatever.
Well, that's good. Unless you want to be wired.
Okay. Here's probably a dumb question, but, because I'm not a biochemist and, by any stretch, but I mean, like, why are we not able to grow coffee here in some, manufactured environment?
You can. I mean, I'm right now harvesting a plant in one of my cafes.
Okay.
The problem is scale. The problem is affordability of scale. In order to do it, it would require a greenhouse. I mean, you could take your chances. Our winters are still too cold in North Carolina to be sure that the plant will grow well and survive.
Yeah.
And the costs involved are, they just don't make any scalability sense for what you could actually charge for that coffee. There is somebody in California who's been doing that. He's been growing. He started out in greenhouses and has having to charge $50 a pound, and then he's been doing some out in the wild to some success. But it's much harder when the weather is not as dependent, and that's really what's been happening. That's the problem that's happening now, is that even where it used to be dependable, it's not anymore. You don't really know when the rains are coming. You don't really know if the temperature's not going to swing wildly.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, I mean, I just wonder about that because there's so many things, like in a restaurant now, you can tip, there's a lot of things you can buy that are locally grown. And then you start thinking about, people thinking about climate change and the impact of air travel and fossil fuel burning. And you're like, okay, well, these beans have got to come up here from, the middle of South America. So what's the impact? So I've just been, because that's become such a big part of our conversation, I've been surprised that I haven't heard more about, people trying to do, whether it's a greenhouse or some way here where you can go look, like you can get your beans from 100 miles away.
Yeah, it's about what are people willing to spend for that.
Right. Well, there it is. Like, yeah. So it's $50 a pound. Yeah. So,
and that's probably not even really the true cost. So, the fact that coffee is a global commodity, unfortunately, it is still on the commodity market. It sort of shows you how interdependent we are, and how it would be almost impossible, even if you could grow some of it in California, to really make up much of an impact in a total volume that would change our consumption of whatever it takes to get it here, right? The fuels that it takes to put it on the ship with all the containers, and like, it just doesn't really, right? People have definitely brought that point up, and what can we do? And the recognition pretty quickly is not too much, and not the way it's structured right now. Not if you really want coffee year round and you want different coffees year round, and it still has to get here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Okay, I've just been curious about that. God, seeing you drink that makes me want to go get another cup, man. I'm already done for the day.
I wish I could share it with you.
Well, I will definitely be getting more of yours, because I tell you, it was fantastic. And so I really enjoy, I mean, I could ask you questions for hours, but I want to respect your time. But I really enjoy talking to you, and you're clearly, I mean, we just barely even scratched the surface of what you know about and how involved you are in it, and how much passion you have around it. But this is like super fascinating to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to like, I live in Waxhaw down south of Charlotte, but
okay,
I'm up in and around Chapel Hill, Cary, Raleigh a lot, and I want to come hang out with you and drink a cup with you sometime. So I'll
absolutely.
Next time I'm going to be heading that way. But I appreciate the time a ton. I appreciate we appreciate the business, and this is highly educational, man. And like, hats off. Like, it's just great to see somebody who found clearly at an early age something you were passionate about, and you've been able to, turn this into your career and your livelihood and your your love, and you're educating, people within and outside the industry, and educating consumers. And it's just so cool to see that, man. So really well done, Scott.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest things is when I got into this, it was with intention. And the idea was I'm not just trying to start a business. I never saw myself as a business owner. Yeah. I wanted to figure out if we could make an impact and start to see things to be better. And I don't mean just us, right? Like you're saying, I think, the idea was how can we push the whole industry forward, and how does that impact every player in that industry? We're looking at buying coffee from people in different countries, but we also want to help them with other economic development platforms. Like, how else can we help you? We've had producers come and stay with us and learn other skills. They know how to grow coffee. Well, we can teach you how to roast. And then they go back and open up a roastery or open up a cafe in their country. And then they hire people. And it just sort of, that ripple just keeps going out and out and out. That's the intention. We just happen to do it through something we love, which is coffee.
Well, you remind me a lot of listening to Yvon Chouinard talk about Patagonia. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, of course.
That it's such a similar philosophy. It's like, okay, well, obviously what we do has a footprint, but he's always obsessed over reducing that footprint. And, it's just a much, much bigger picture than just like, hey, let's sell a bunch of clothes.
Right.
I love that. I love his, now he's, donated all of his shares to the
everything. Yep.
Really, like, you can tell the authenticity that he operated with. It never changed. He never went, yeah, I'm done, I'm going to sell this thing for $5 billion. Like, no, he's always had that true care and passion and love. I clearly see that same strain through you, which is,
oh, thank you. I mean,
no doubt about it. I'm listening to you. I'm like, I feel like I'm listening to like the coffee version of Yvon Chouinard, man. Like, it's just awesome to see. It's so, I respect it so much. I think it's, wonderful to see somebody that's in it for those reasons. And, the success you may have in business ultimately is just the byproduct, not the objective. And I think that's really cool, man. And I'm glad to get to know you.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time, and I'll put the plug in for our utilization of your product, which has been fantastic. And we use it across the board, right? So we've got 4 different companies that are linked and able to communicate well because of it.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's very kind of you, man. We appreciate the business. I appreciate your time. Tell your team hello and thank you. And let's stay in touch, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got my number.
All right, Scott. Good to talk to you, man. Have a good one.
Take care.
See you.